Hello, grade 6, and welcome back to more with the Iroquois. We have been talking so far about we introduce the Confederacy, right? And so what that is these separate nations that you see ahead of us. They were once separate, distinct tribes, right? And they've joined and formed together into the Iroquois Confederacy. Remember, it was a man named the Peacemaker who brought harmony to their lives. He basically said, don't fight, right? Don't have conflict like they were having, and they're trying to form into a collective identity, and that's something we're going to be talking about a lot. Last topic we talked about. After that, we talked about how they started to have more social structure, right? What did the actual look like? So now we're going to look at, well, they have social structure, they have things in common. What brought that kind of unity and that sense of one big nation as opposed to separate different tribes? So yeah, we're looking at the symbols of collective identity, and I want you to look at these three images. All right, so the purple on the left with the white, the longhouse, and this tree. And I just want you to look at it for a moment and just think about, what do you see? Right? What does this actually mean? What do you think is happening? All right, so if we look at that on the purple on the purple side, we should be able to know that this looks like there's some sort of small parts to it, and there's two colors. There's purple and there's white, and this white is forming into a pattern, and this pattern has different shapes in it. Okay, so again, we're seeing what we can think of it. This, we've already talked about longhouses, so hopefully you have some ideas about what that is already, but so we don't need to elaborate it hopefully too much. But think about that, maybe how can it affect that idea of collective identity? And this last one, this one's pretty new to us, right? This tree. Right? What are some things we notice? Well, we notice that there are branches with not leaves but needles, right? We have a bird, a hawk or some falcon, an eagle maybe on the top. We have what looks to be some sort of item underneath the tree, and then four roots. Okay? From there, we're going to start. These are the three aspects we're going to analyze in terms of symbols of collective identity. So it's good to take a look at them now and start thinking about, what could those actually mean? What do those symbols mean a little bit more? Because we're talking about symbols today. Before we move on, obviously we need to define what is collective identity, because that's the whole point of today's topic, right? Is things that kind of, symbols that represent collective identity. And collective identity is a shared belief system between people, right? It's a sense of belonging to a bigger group. Often when we talk about collective identity, we're talking in terms of language, religion, culture, ethnicity. Some examples are, as I've already listed a bunch, with gender and class maybe. You have a lot of things in common with people who have who share similar traits, right? So there's your individual identity. Those are the small things that make up you, right? It's the combination of stuff that make up you. You have your own individual identity. Maybe you like TikTok dances, you like Stranger Things, but you don't like Nike shoes, and you don't like iPhones, right? These are small aspects to your personality. Maybe you're also from the Middle East, but one of your parents isn't, right? So these small aspects make up who you are as an individual. That's your individual identity. But then on a bigger note, people have some of your traits in common too, right? So you are from the Middle East, so you are part of the collective that is the Middle East, and they form into an identity. They have shared language sometimes. Like, I know the Middle East is much bigger, but they have shared culture, they have shared values. Then we think about more aspects of your own individual identity. Like, I am, for instance, I'm a male, right? So I have things in common. I am part of the male collective. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about symbols that kind of define the collective identity of the Iroquois people. They kind of shows us who they were. We have a couple images and we'll talk about more, but maybe, for instance, having a sports team is a big part of being a collective identity, right? You have that in common with a lot of people. You have the same values. Yeah, and it's a culture of that sports team. So you can see what these gentlemen are wearing. Yeah, and we'll continue to talk about collective identity more. The first thing we got to do is we got to review the Great Law of Peace. We talked about this before, but basically what this is it's the Constitution, it's the law book, it's the rule book. It guides the Iroquois people about how to live. When Peacemaker united the tribes, right? We can see 5 of the 6 tribes on this wampum belt underneath it, right? We can see the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Mohawk, right? We have and later on, one more would join in. But basically, the Great Law of Peace shows them how to organize and structure the Confederacy, the union of all the tribes, right? It was very long, though, and it was kind of complicated. But more than that, the First Nations people had an oral history for the most part. So they needed some sort of record that would kind of cement in that these are the terms of the Great Law of Peace. And so how they did that is they used something called wampum belts. And that's what we're going to investigate. But it's very important that you kind of know why they created wampum belts and what they mean. That's the most important one. The first symbol of collective identity, the first thing that we talk about when we talk about a collective identity is the longhouse. All right, so remember, people of the same clan would all live in this longhouse, right? It would include grandparents and parents and uncles, aunts, cousins, sons and daughters. When your daughter was married or a woman was married, the male would come join in on her longhouse and basically grow a family from that. And as the family continued to extend, so did the longhouse. It is a symbol of collective identity because you unified with your tribe, right? So when you thought about your identity, not only are you a person, you are also a part of something bigger. You belong, because remember our word for collective identity is belonging to a group. You belong to a tribe, right? You belong to this group, and from there, it was a place where you met and discussed important issues. And so we also talked about how in different tribes, right? So if we look at this image, I have to go way back. This image here, right in the middle, the map, if you were a Mohawk, you might be part of the Bear tribe, just like the Seneca, even though you're not even touching borders. Okay, so your longhouse, it gives you that sense of you belong to a much larger group than you. And so it represented that these people were more than just the Mohawk people, or they're more than just this small family. It actually is a place where people can gather together and form a bond. The next one is the Tree of Peace. And we're going to break down some of the things that you've already saw, right? The Tree of Peace is a symbol associated with the story of the peacekeeper. So basically, it's an image that represents the actual story of the creation of the Iroquois Confederacy, right? Each part has an image associated with it, and it has a kind of a message. So at the very top, we have an eagle. And is said to be a messenger to the Creator. So the Creator is the God, the Creator of the world to the indigenous people. The eagle is the protector of peace. Placed on the top of the Tree of Peace, it alerts members of the Confederacy if danger approaches. Right? It's basically saying, I'm looking out for the safety of all of the Confederacy, all people in the Confederacy. The needles, the branch, the trees, right? The needles, which always grow in a cluster of 5. Now you might say 5 because of the symbolic uniting of the nations, the 5 nations coming together. The white pine also has broad branches, so it's a pine tree, by the way, that provides shelter and protection to all. Right? And so there's actually a story in which when Peacemaker gathered the chiefs first together, they sat underneath the broad branches of the white pine, and they sat under there to discuss how the Confederacy is going to look. Okay, so already you have the looking out and the protection and the shelter. Now what you have on your left is you have the roots at the base of the great tree. So there's 4 white roots, which represents the 4 different directions, north, south, east, and west. Basically, following these roots, other nations can find the great Tree of Peace and join the Iroquois Confederacy. If you follow the route, you can come to the main source, the thing that unifies the people, right? The Tree of Peace is what unifies them and brings them together. So even if you are on the far east, you're the Mohawk. So they're at the farthest east. They're called the gatekeepers of the east, right? You can follow it and you can be connected. Your roots are connected back to the rest of the other Iroquois tribes into the Iroquois Confederacy. The roots represent peace and they represent strength. When you think about a tree, right, if its roots are strong, even during a storm, it won't be uplifted. And so by having deep roots that spread out across the Iroquois Confederacy, it shows that there's strength in it, that it can't be removed. And then the last one, that image, it's not a pipe right? Below it is often a weapon. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the expression to bury a hatchet, right? But basically what that means is this is exactly what it represents. It's right, you're burying your weapon underneath a tree, right? Men throw their weapons to they bury their greed, their hatred, their jealousy. It shows basically it's an end of the fighting, right? There's no more conflict. So the tree of peace, it shows that there's protection, there's connection, and there's the end of conflict. It's an image in which the Iroquois Confederacy rallied around, and it's much like the wampum belt we're going to discuss. It reminds them of the values that they try to uphold in the Confederacy. Right? They said, this is what we value, this is what we want to uphold. So whenever there's any kind of dispute or conflict, or they're not sure how to exist, they refer back to this, just like the longhouse. And the last thing, the last kind of symbol that represents how people belong, right, is the wampum belt, right? So wampum belts, they're used to kind of record all important events and meetings and ideas. A big thing also was treaties, right? We'll talk about that later. But basically, when Europeans first came to North America, they encountered the Iroquois people. They presented them with wampum belts to kind of show an agreement, basically like a truce, a treaty. It says like, I'm going to be harmonious and I'm going to work with you. You're going to work with me. And so this image was called the 2-row wampum belts. So you have 3 rows of white and 2 rows of purple. In all wampum belts, every color, every shape, and the placement of the beads, because all those small little squares, those are individual beads, right? They have significant meaning, kind of like a poem, how each line has meaning to it as well. So for this one, the 2 parallel, that means the purple lines that are going side by side, they represent the 2 parties in the agreement. They represent the Iroquois, right, the Haudenosaunee, and they represent the European. So right away, this wampum belt is showing that the Iroquois see themselves as a collective. They see themselves as a bigger group. And the wampum belt kind of reinforces that idea, right? It's showing them that they all belong. So the longhouse shows that they belong as a part of a clan. They extend. It's a place where they can come discuss. The tree of the great tree of peace, right? It also shows that they are part of the Confederacy. And then the Iroquois, the wampum belt shows that it's part of a great nation. So you have the 2 parallel lines. Each boat has its own. So each parallel line has its own culture and tradition and laws, but they're working together. The white lines, though, they show that they travel in peace and friendship without interference. So right away, we have another symbol that proves the identity, the collective identity of the people. So the one thing, the Hiawatha wampum belt is the one thing that you need to know, for sure, right? I have a little star beside it on this corner. You need to understand what this specific wampum belt means. So yes, the 2-row wampum belt is important. It talks about the treaty, but this one records kind of the creation and the principles, the foundations of the Iroquois Confederacy. So this is like how the Iroquois Confederacy happened. Okay? It represents the Great Law of Peace. So each figure in the belt represents one of the 5 founding nations. So we have 5 distinct shapes, okay, and they represent the 5 founding nations based on their geographic order. So this is like where they are in the map. If we go back all the way, sorry, I know I have to go back quite a bit. We have the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Onondaga, and the Mohawk. Right? So remember that, if you can. Remember that order. Because what we have is you have the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Mohawk nations. Okay? So you have the nations in the order that they already are. The Tuscarora are not represented because at the time of this, they hadn't joined yet. Right? So you have these individual shape that represents the individual nations, and you have this white line that's joining them. And this represents unity, and it represents peace. In the middle stands the tree of peace that we already talked about. Remember? We talked about how its roots are strong. We talked about its branches are protect and shelter. We talked about how there's always watching out for each other for danger with the eagle. And we talked about burying conflict. So at the middle of everything that's happening, right, between the lines of peace, there is that idea of the Confederacy. The Confederacy is at the center of their values and what they have in common. Wampum belts were typically, right, they were made from a quahog shell. It's a kind of clam that you find in North America on the East Coast. It's a round clam shell. You can kind of see it on that second image. That's kind of complete. And so the word wampum comes from the Algonquin, which is it's close to the Iroquois Haudenosaunee people term for the shell. It is cut, right, and it's cut, and then kind of they bore it out. That's called, like, they make a circle out of it, right? They bore out the middle, they drill down using that stick, and then they can string a string through it. If you want to kind of watch more information on what it looks like, you can either YouTube it, right, or you click on that. It'll talk. There's a lot of information on this link about how to create it. But it comes from originally the shell, so that's why you'll only typically see. There's not a good clear picture, but you'll only clearly usually see the purple and the white, because the purple and white are natural colors. And what again, something that you'll learn more about in grade 7 is the First Nations connection to nature. And what this really shows is the shell is a living record. It's bringing nature into their treaties and their events and their histories. So it's more, again, it's more about values, right? It's about spirituality. It's about connecting to each other and to the land. Here you can go through this if you want on your own. These are just more common examples of wampum belts. And so I have their names, I have an image, and I have a little description. So you can read up on them. I find it fascinating. That's all we're going to talk about for this video. There's going to be another video, and it's going to talk about modern day. Please watch that next.